Welcome to the Odyssey Convertible Bag sew along. We're going to start with all of the little loops and things that need to get ironed at the beginning and the straps. So to start, you should have 2 straps from piece K, your 2 piece L top D-ring attachers. I'm doing the small, so I need 4 piece M bottom D-ring attachers. If you're doing the large, you will need only 2 of those. And for the small, you need a piece O strap cover and the handle for either size. So I'm going to start first with a strap. If you are doing the large, you have these 2 wider pieces and they're going to stay separate. But if you are doing the small, or at least if you're doing the convertible version of the small, then you need to sew these 2 pieces together at one end to make one long strap. I'll sew these with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And now we want to move, if I didn't have vinyl, I'd be moving to my ironing board, but all of these are vinyl and I can't iron them, so I will just describe and show what to do. If you have fabric that can be ironed, iron this center seam flat, and then at the very end, both short ends, you will iron that down 3/8 of an inch. Because this is vinyl, I do like to, it's a pretty thin vinyl, but all those layers can be thick once it's all folded in. So I'm going to sew these ends down before folding this strap. Oops. I should have put on my Teflon foot. And purely to make things easier for me, this seam is later on going to be covered up, but I want this to lay flat, and so I'm going to top stitch. Alright, I don't need my sewing machine again for a little while. So if you are at your ironing board, you'll want to take, and if you have a fabric that can be ironed, you'll want to iron your strap lengthwise. Then you will fold in these long edges towards that center seam that you just ironed, and iron it that way, and then fold it in half and press it again. Now I am going, since I can't iron this, I'm just going to fold this in by hand as neatly as possible, and then use my sewing clips. And I'm going to do that now for the whole length. Okay, now I've got my full length of strap all clipped and ready to go, but I'm doing all of the ironing and clipping together, and then I'm going to be sewing. So next, I'm going to take my piece and handle, and this is folded in half and then in towards the middle and then in half again, just like the straps, but the total width of this is about 3/4 of an inch rather than an inch for the straps. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you're doing the large straps, you only fold in one short end, and then you fold it like the other one in the same manner, and leave one end raw. If you are doing the small small backpack, you'll use the thinner small pieces, and you can don't attach them in the middle. Leave them separate as 2 pieces and fold in one short end of each. If you're going to do it, if you're making this for a smaller child, you might want to shorten those straps. I did about 20 inches for my toddler, and that was a good length. And for an older kid, you could do it somewhere in between. Okay, I'll do the strap cover next. For this one, you will iron in the short edges. This covers the center of that long strap later on. Set that aside. Let's see, for both the piece L's and the piece M's, the pattern gives a vinyl adaptation so that you don't end up with too thick of pieces. This is the piece M for my large. The pattern calls for you to fold the edges in 3/8 of an inch, iron them in, and then iron them in half, and that'll be your 1-inch loop that will be used for D-rings or for zipper tabs. But if you're using vinyl like I am, that just gets to be pretty thick. So instead, I fold the edges in towards the center and clip it. And these will then be able to go around the 1-inch D-ring. So for the small size, I cut out 4 piece M's. It doesn't matter whether you're doing the convertible or the backpack, you need 4 piece M's. And all of these get clipped in. And you will only need 2 for the size large of the piece M, because you're not using it as D-ring attachers, you're using them as zipper tabs on the side of the zipper, the ends of the zippers. Now, if you have a domestic machine, you might have trouble going through all these layers, even if you do this vinyl adaptation. I found that my domestic machine struggled a little bit, because at that point it's going over all these layers plus the fabric at the end of the zipper. But hopefully this one it'll work, because I am not doing as many layers. That's why for this one I decided to use the exterior fabric instead of vinyl, and it should be able to go through that many layers at the end of the zipper. All right, those are set aside. And then this is also another piece that's only needed for the small. Now make sure that you don't turn this piece sideways, because then it'll be too wide and too short. So keep it orientation. And these are used for the top D-ring. And these will fit through the top D-ring at the top for the small convertible. Okay, I am now going to stitch along all of these, top stitch. And I'm actually going to switch to my Teflon foot. I think I'll be happier with the results. Yeah, it's a little easier. Okay, so in the pattern I have you sew all of that and then attach them to their D-rings, but I thought it might be helpful to reinforce what each of these pieces are. And before I do that, I want to discuss these rings. This is the top D-ring and the strap needs to be able to go through it for the convertible. Now that means it needs to be wider. I call for 1.5 inch D-ring while using 1-inch straps. And as long as your swivel hook fits through it, then you can use a different shaped ring if you want to do a circle ring or a rectangular ring, but you need to check that your swivel hook fits through it. Also, your 1-inch slider needs to be able to fit through it. And these little D-rings are used at the bottom. You can use circle, you can use something else as long, or a different size, as long as you're happy with a swivel ring connecting to it. And these are also used for the small backpack version, and the strap will go through it. Okay, so these pieces are used for the top D-ring, and I'm going to baste across the bottom. And set these aside. All right, 2 of these I'm just going to stitch and not wrap around anything because they're going to be used for the zipper tab later on. Got a little crooked on that. I'm going to use this on one of the D-rings because that's going to be covered up later and I don't want that crooked stitch being visible. and set that aside. Goes around a 1-inch strap. And these ones are just going to be top stitch and set aside. Same with this one, top stitch, set aside. My strap cover, just going to stitch this end down and then set aside. I will need this soon, so I'm going to keep it close at hand. Oops. And my handle. To stitch both sides of the handle. This will be used later on. And now my strap. Now, because I already stitched along this edge, I'm not going to stitch that now. I'm going to stitch just the long edges. Later on, when this is put into the strap, it'll this end will get sewn again when it's being sewn through the slider. So for now, I'm just going to sew the long ends. Alright, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is if you're using vinyl and you don't want to turn these ends under, you can leave them raw and use an edge coat on them. But here I have my almost finished convertible strap.